I exposed the Islamophobic campaigning, and it's made me enemies. People who will not forgive me for doing that.
Peter Oborne has a reputation for integrity. The award-winning journalist, author and filmmaker made national news in 2015 when he resigned as the Daily Telegraph's chief political commentator, accusing the paper of allowing advertising relationships to interfere with editorial policy. 4 years later, Oborne once more made the UK's headlines when he became the highest profile Brexiteer to publicly change his mind, putting what he viewed as the national interest before his own personal reputation.
I thought, if someone as clever as Oborne thinks it's all going to be all right, then wind your neck in, James. And now you acknowledge it's not going to be all right.
I'm very happy to accept that I've made mistakes of analysis. I have absolutely accepted it, and I take full responsibility.
Now, Oborne has chosen perhaps his most controversial cause yet, taking on the UK press and their free speech defence of the Charlie Hebdo cartoons.
The idea of the word cartoon is that they're funny. The Charlie Hebdo cartoons were not funny. They were an attack, a direct, deliberate attack on a minority community. They portray Prophet Muhammad in a really disgusting way. All of the press, without exception, the mainstream press, says this is an issue of free speech. There is an absolute issue, entitlement to free speech in this country. Well, I'm afraid I disagree with that. That isn't true. You can show that isn't true. There never has been free speech in Britain. You know, you mustn't be racist. You mustn't celebrate violence. You mustn't be anti-Semitic, deny the Holocaust. I completely agree with all of this. But why is there an exception made for offensive betrayals of the Prophet Muhammad? Why is it that we have a license to offend the deepest beliefs of Muslims?
Offensive cartoons are far from the only problem Oborne has identified. His latest book decries the increasing number of falsehoods found in public life, and these falsehoods extend to recent coverage of Britain's Muslims.
Think of the way they portrayed the events in Tower Hamlets, the Christian adoption story. That's the Times, which is supposed to be our great newspaper of record. On the front page for 4 days in a row, they had really inflammatory stories about a Muslim family adopting a Christian girl. Absolutely without foundation, put out in a very vindictive way against Muslims. That isn't reporting the news, that's inventing the news.
Worse, Oborne sees a shared agenda between the far-right anti-Islam campaigners and the so-called Muslim extremists. And he's quick to condemn both parties.
There is a shared interest between the far right or the Islamophobic journalists and policymakers and politicians, and the hotheads and extremists in the Muslim community who want to stir this up. Both sides are arguing ultimately that there is a fundamental conflict between Islam and the West. Now, I believe that's nonsense. I believe that history shows that's nonsense. Again and again in history, we've looked for tolerance not to Christianity or to liberalism, but actually to Islam.
Oborne, though, has not lost hope for the future of Britain's minorities.
There are all kinds of wonderful things about Britain, by the way. We have had great achievements in terms of race relations, in terms of welcoming minorities. For me, Britain is about fairness. More than anything, that's the one thing I think we should be about, is tolerance and fairness, and therefore somebody who comes to live in this country and is a British citizen deserves to be treated with the same respect as anybody else.